The Enterprise cut through the darkness of space with the quiet confidence of Starfleet's finest vessel, her hull gleaming under the distant light of stars that had burned for billions of years. Captain James T. Kirk sat in his command chair, reviewing reports of increased Romulan activity near the neutral zone. It was routine work, the kind that filled the spaces between discovery and danger. Spock stood at his science station, his fingers dancing across the console with the precision of a Vulcan mind processing data at speeds that would exhaust any human operator. "Captain," Spock announced, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone delivering information of significance, "I am detecting an anomalous energy signature at coordinates Mark 127. It does not correspond to any known vessel or phenomenon in our databases." Kirk leaned forward slightly, the gesture habitual when something intrigued him. "Distance, Mr. Spock. 200,000 kilometers, bearing 047. The energy signature is unstable. It appears to be fluctuating between spatial dimensions at a rate I cannot accurately measure. Recommend yellow alert and investigation." The captain nodded to Uhura. "Yellow alert. Helm, adjust course to investigate. 1/4 impulse." The Enterprise responded smoothly, her course shifting as the crew moved through their practice drill. What none of them could have anticipated was that they were sailing directly into a tear in the fabric of reality itself, a rupture between worlds that would shatter everything they understood about the limits of life, death, and morality. The anomaly grew larger on their view screen, a roiling mass of brilliant colors that hurt to look at directly. It pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm, as though it were breathing. Spock's readings became increasingly erratic, his eyebrow rising fractionally, the Vulcan equivalent of alarm. "Captain, the anomaly is destabilizing. Energy output is increasing exponentially. I recommend." The words never finished. The screen flared white-hot. Alarms shrieked across the bridge. The Enterprise shuddered violently, throwing crew members from their stations. Kirk gripped the armrests of his chair, fighting the violent pitch and yaw of his ship. For a moment that felt like an eternity, the laws of physics seemed to bend and break around them. Then, silence. The anomaly collapsed in on itself, vanishing from their sensors as though it had never existed. But something had come through. Spock's instruments screamed with data that made no sense. Energy readings consistent with nothing in Federation science. A transporter signature that was simultaneous and contradictory, as if something had materialized and unmaterialized at the exact same moment. "Status report," Kirk demanded, pulling himself back into his chair. "Shields held," Scotty's voice crackled through the comm, "but we took damage to the aft section." The transporter room. "Captain, something came through. We've got an unidentified humanoid in transporter room 3. But the readings they're impossible, sir." Kirk was already moving. "Spock, you have the con. Increase security to the transporter room. Full tactical alert." The captain's quarters blurred past as Kirk moved through the corridors with purpose. He arrived at the observation window of transporter room 3 to find a sight that stopped him cold. On the pad lay a figure. Humanoid, yes, but radiating an aura of danger so palpable that even through the reinforced glass, Kirk felt it. The figure was tall, impossibly pale, with snow-white hair and a face that belonged to no Earth ancestry Kirk had ever encountered. But it was the eyes that truly unsettled him, ancient, intelligent, and gleaming with a hunger that transcended simple predation. The figure's eyes opened. "Mr. Spock," Kirk said into his communicator, keeping his voice level even as every instinct screamed at him to evacuate the room. "Full containment protocols. Force." The words never finished. The screen flared white-hot. Alarms shrieked across the bridge. The Enterprise shuddered violently, throwing crew members from their stations. Kirk gripped the armrests of his chair, fighting the violent pitch and yaw of his ship. For a moment that felt like an eternity, the laws of physics seemed to bend and break around them. Then, silence. The anomaly collapsed in on itself, vanishing from their sensors as though it had never existed. But something had come through. Spock's instruments screamed with data that made no sense. Energy readings consistent with nothing in Federation science. A transporter signature that was simultaneous and contradictory, as if something had materialized and unmaterialized at the exact same moment. Status report. Kirk demanded, pulling himself back into his chair. Shields held, Scotty's voice crackled through the comm, but we took damage to the aft section. The transporter room. Captain, something came through. We've got an unidentified humanoid in transporter room 3. But the readings they're impossible, sir. Kirk was already moving. Spock, you have the con. Increase security to the transporter room. Full tactical alert. The captain's quarters blurred past as Kirk moved through the corridors with purpose. He arrived at the observation window of transporter room 3 to find a sight that stopped him cold. On the pad lay a figure. Humanoid, yes, but radiating an aura of danger so palpable that even through the reinforced glass, Kirk felt it. The figure was tall, impossibly pale, with snow-white hair and a face that belonged to no Earth ancestry Kirk had ever encountered. But it was the eyes that truly unsettled him, ancient, intelligent, and gleaming with a hunger that transcended simple predation. The figure's eyes opened. Mr. Spock, Kirk said into his communicator, keeping his voice level even as every instinct screamed at him to evacuate the room. Full containment protocols. Force fields at maximum. And get me detailed readings on that being. Everything. On the bridge, Spock's fingers flew across his console with renewed urgency. The readings were unlike anything in Federation databases. The being's cellular structure was simultaneously organic and something else, something that defied classification. Its molecular density fluctuated. Its neural patterns suggested a consciousness of staggering complexity. And beneath it all, a fundamental energy signature that Spock's instruments could barely quantify. The being is alive, Captain, Spock reported carefully, though I use the term with considerable reservation. Its physiology suggests an age of several centuries, yet its cellular structure is intact and regenerating. I have never encountered anything remotely similar. Kirk's jaw tightened. Keep it contained. Nobody enters that room without my direct authorization. And Spock. Yes, Captain. Get me everything you can on what brought it here. That anomaly didn't appear naturally. Something opened a door from the other side. Below them, in the depths of space, the rupture had sealed itself. But the damage was done. Alucard, the eternal warrior, the no-life king, had crossed the threshold between worlds. And in a universe where he could not control the rules, where his predatory nature had no framework, where immortality was scientifically impossible, he would discover that true freedom meant true isolation. He rose from the transporter pad, moving with a grace that belied his towering frame. The force field hummed before him, a barrier of pure energy. He smiled, an expression that was neither welcoming nor reassuring, but something far more dangerous, curious. In that moment, Kirk understood that they had not salvaged a survivor from an anomaly. They had caught something far more deadly, a predator from another world, and they had no idea how to contain it. The interrogation room was designed for standard Federation questioning protocols, climate-controlled, with transparent barriers that allowed observation without direct contact. It was not designed for a being that seemed to generate an ambient temperature drop and a sense of dread that affected even trained Starfleet officers. Spock sat across from Alucard, PADD in hand, his Vulcan composure the only thing holding the room together. I am Commander Spock, Science Officer of the Federation Starship Enterprise, he began, his tone carrying the measured precision that had diffused countless hostile encounters. We have recovered you from an interdimensional anomaly. Can you understand me? Alucard's head tilted slightly, a gesture that seemed almost predatory in its deliberation. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries, deep, melodious, and utterly devoid of warmth. I understand you perfectly, Commander. Your language is not so different from the ones I have mastered over the centuries. The question is whether you understand me. Spock's eyebrow rose incrementally. You claim to have existed for centuries. Our records indicate that human lifespan averages. I am not human, Alucard interrupted, not unkindly. That much should be obvious from even your most rudimentary sensor analysis. I am Alucard. I am immortal. I am a predator of the highest order. And I have just arrived in a universe where none of those things should be possible. He leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This is fascinating. Kirk watched from the observation deck above, his hands clasped behind his back. Spock's voice came through the comm. Captain, his knowledge of our language suggests either prior exposure to human cultures or extraordinary linguistic ability. His claims of immortality are unverifiable, but his physiology supports extended lifespans. I recommend. He's testing us, Kirk interrupted. He wants to see how we react. What's his psychological profile? Spock paused, a hesitation unusual for the Vulcan. Incomplete, Captain. His neural patterns are not consistent with standard psychological frameworks. He appears to be simultaneously coherent and fragmented, as though his consciousness exists in multiple states simultaneously. I can only conclude that the dimensional crossing may have caused neurological damage, or his mind is fundamentally different from humanoid baseline. In the interrogation room below, Alucard was speaking again, his words directed at the observation window where he undoubtedly knew Kirk was watching. Your captain is wise not to approach me directly. There are predators in your universe, I imagine, sharks in your oceans, apex carnivores in your jungles. You understand that some things cannot be negotiated with, only studied from a safe distance. He stood, his movements fluid and perfectly controlled. The security officers outside stiffened, hands moving toward their phasers. But I am not a hunger that consumes indiscriminately. I am a choice. I am will. I am centuries of evolution beyond the simple need to feed. Kirk made his decision. He activated the calm, hold position. I'm coming down. Spock's voice was immediate. Captain, I advise against. Noted, Mr. Spock. Maintain yellow alert and monitor everything. Kirk descended through the corridors of his ship with the confidence of a man who had negotiated with gods, aliens, and creatures beyond understanding. The interrogation room door hissed open. He entered alone, deliberately leaving his phaser holstered. It was a calculated risk, the kind Kirk had learned to take in the deep black of space. Alucard's eyes tracked him with the intensity of a predator assessing prey. But there was something else in that gaze, recognition. Captain Kirk, he said, the name emerging as though tasted. The legendary James T. Kirk. I have seen your future reflected in the minds of those who would have served you. You are a man of contradictions, cautious yet reckless, principled yet willing to break rules when circumstance demands it. You would not last 5 minutes in my world. I don't need to last in your world, Kirk replied, keeping his voice steady. You're in mine now. And here, we have rules. Laws. A framework of civilization that keeps beings, predatory or otherwise, from consuming each other. Alucard laughed, a sound like thunder rolling across a distant landscape. Your civilization is a child's game of make-believe, Captain. You play at order while the universe plays for keeps. But I will respect your game, for now. It has been centuries since I encountered something truly new. Your Federation intrigues me. Your technology intrigues me. And your belief that a universe can be ordered through logic and consensus, that intrigues me most of all. He extended his hand toward Kirk, a gesture so human it was almost shocking coming from a creature so clearly not human. I am Alucard. And I suspect, Captain, that I am going to be extremely valuable to you. Or extremely dangerous. Only time will tell which. Kirk looked at the extended hand. Every instinct screamed at him not to touch it. But he understood something in that moment. Alucard was right. He was new. He was unknown. And in the darkness between stars, that made him either the greatest asset or the most catastrophic threat the Federation had ever encountered. He shook Alucard's hand. The touch was ice-cold, and in that moment of contact, Kirk felt something else, a vast intelligence regarding him with something that might have been respect, or might have been the evaluation of a predator sizing up potential prey. When he withdrew his hand, Kirk knew that everything had changed. The universe had opened, and something ancient and terrible had stepped through the door. Spock's analysis of Alucard occupied nearly 3 hours of the science officer's time, producing results that grew progressively more troubling with each measurement. The creature, for Spock had concluded that being was insufficient terminology, did not fit any known biological framework. His cellular regeneration rate was beyond even Vulcan healing capabilities. His neural complexity suggested consciousness operating simultaneously across multiple dimensional states. And his energy signature, when carefully measured, suggested the presence of something beyond matter and energy, something that Federation science had no classification for. Captain, Spock reported, presenting his findings on the bridge while Alucard remained in a specially modified holding cell that had been hastily constructed in a cargo bay. I have completed preliminary analysis. The subject demonstrates several anomalies that I find troubling. Kirk leaned back in his command chair. Let's have it, Mr. Spock. Don't spare the details. The subject's physiology suggests an organism that has evolved beyond death. Not in the biological sense, cellular death still occurs and is immediately regenerated. But in a more fundamental way. His consciousness appears to persist independent of physical form. If his physical body were destroyed, I theorize he would reconstitute, though the precise mechanism remains unclear. Scotty, standing near the engineering station, let out a low whistle. The man can he be killed? That's not a guest we're hostin', Captain. That's a problem we're keepin' in Cargo Bay 4. His claims of centuries of existence appear substantiated by several factors, Spock continued, unperturbed. His knowledge base is extraordinarily vast. His combat training is beyond anything in Starfleet records. And his understanding of human psychology and behavior. He appears capable of reading individuals with remarkable accuracy. Kirk's mind was already working through the implications. Is he a threat? Yes, Spock answered without hesitation. But also potentially invaluable. His knowledge of dimensional mechanics could revolutionize Federation physics. His combat experience could provide tactical insight centuries beyond our current doctrine. The question is not whether he is dangerous, Captain. The question is whether his dangerousness can be directed toward productive ends. Before Kirk could respond, the red alert klaxon shattered the bridge atmosphere. Uhura's hands flew across her console. Captain. We have a Romulan vessel decloaking. 2,000 kilometers off the starboard bow. They're raising shields and charging weapons. Yellow alert has become active threat, Sulu announced, his hands moving with practiced efficiency across his helm console. The Romulan warbird is moving to intercept. Estimate contact in 4 minutes at current velocity. Kirk's body moved on pure instinct. Battle stations. Scotty, shields to maximum. Evasive pattern delta. Spock, get me a weapons assessment. The Romulan vessel is identified as a D-7 class warbird, Spock reported, his fingers flying across his console. Firepower equivalent to our own. However, Captain, I am detecting something on their sensors. They have detected Alucard's energy signature. I believe they may have been monitoring our position and investigating the anomaly's origin point. Kirk's jaw tightened. Of course. The Romulans would have detected the dimensional rupture just as clearly as Starfleet had. And unlike Starfleet, they would see potential in capturing a being of Alucard's apparent power. Hail them, he commanded. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the harsh features of a Romulan commander, a woman with the classic pointed ears and severe visage of her species. Her expression was one of cold calculation. Enterprise, this is Commander Claris of the Romulan vessel Talvath. You have in your possession a being of significant strategic value. I am giving you one opportunity to transfer that being to our custody. Refuse, and we will take it by force. Kirk's response was immediate and controlled. We don't negotiate with threats, Commander. This being arrived on our ship through an accident of physics. It is our responsibility. Then your responsibility will be your death, Claris replied, and the communication channel closed. All hands, brace for impact. Kirk shouted as the Romulan weapons began their charge. The Enterprise shuddered under the first volley, her shields flaring green against the plasma bolt. Sulu fought the helm, pulling the massive starship into a tight barrel roll that evaded the second shot. But the Romulan vessel was maneuvering with expert precision, hurting the Enterprise toward the gravity well of a nearby asteroid field. In Cargo Bay 4, Alucard stood in his containment field, feeling the vibrations of battle reverberate through the Enterprise's frame. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, a smile spread across his face. Combat. Violence. The familiar song of warfare that had defined his existence for centuries. The captain is fighting for me, he said to the empty air, his voice carrying a note of something almost like appreciation. How quaint. Spock's voice crackled through the ship's comm. Captain, the Romulan vessel is executing coordinated attack patterns. Our weapons are inflicting minimal damage to their shields. They are pushing us deeper into the asteroid field, perhaps intending to use the debris to obscure their weapons lock. Then that's what we'll give them, Kirk replied, banking hard to port. Sulu, plot a course directly through the densest part of the field. Maximum evasive. Chekhov, time those phaser shots to detonate asteroids. Use them as shields. The Enterprise dove into the asteroid field like a hawk diving through a forest, weaving between tumbling rocks with a grace that belied her massive size. Behind her, the Romulan warbird followed, less nimble but no less determined. Phaser fire streaked across the darkness, and Kirk's brilliant tactics were buying them seconds, but not safety. Then Spock's voice came through with a note of surprise. Captain, the subject, Alucard, has somehow disabled his containment field. He is moving toward the bridge. Kirk's response was automatic, all security to the bridge. Red alert. But it was already too late. The bridge doors hissed open, and Alucard walked through them as though they were no barrier at all, his movements controlled and purposeful. Every phaser on the bridge trained on him. Every hand tensed for violence. Alucard ignored the weapons entirely. He moved to stand beside Kirk's command chair and looked at the view screen where the Romulan vessel danced through the asteroid field. Captain, Alucard said simply, let me fight. Kirk faced an impossible choice. Trust the being they had just contained. Risk the security of his ship and crew on a creature that had existed for centuries as a predator. Or recognize that sometimes, in the darkness between stars, the only way to survive was to dance with the devil and hope he preferred you alive. Do it, Kirk commanded. Alucard's eyes gleamed red in the darkness of the bridge. Alucard moved through the Enterprise like a force of nature, his presence alone causing every crew member he passed to instinctively retreat. The creature descended toward the lower decks with a purpose that suggested intimate familiarity with the ship's layout, a familiarity he could not possibly possess. Yet as he walked, his eyes seemed to absorb architectural details, structural weaknesses, power conduit locations. By the time he reached the exterior hull, he had mapped the Enterprise as thoroughly as any Starfleet engineer. What happened next defied everything Kirk witnessed on the bridge view screen. The phaser fire from the Romulan warbird should have struck the Enterprise's starboard nacelle. But instead, a figure materialized in space itself, Alucard, exposed to the vacuum, his form somehow stable in the radiation and void. His right hand extended toward the incoming plasma bolt. And impossibly, the energy dissipated against his palm as though he were absorbing it directly into himself. What in the name of? Scotty's voice trailed off in the engineering section. Spock's readings became chaotic. Captain, the subject is in hard vacuum. Life signs are, fluctuating but present. He is, feeding on the Romulan weapon's energy output. Fascinating. Alucard turned his attention to the Talvath and began to move. Not through conventional propulsion. There was no thrust, no exhaust. He simply existed in a new location, as though space itself was negotiable to him. With each movement, with each position, he grew stronger, his form becoming more defined, more solid, more terrifyingly real. The Romulan commander's composure finally cracked. "What is that thing?" she demanded. On the Enterprise bridge, Kirk watched with a mixture of awe and horror. "Spock, what's he doing?" "His consciousness appears to be operating across multiple dimensional coordinates simultaneously," Spock reported, his professional tone barely masking his own shock. "He is not moving through space in the conventional sense. He is moving through probability space. Existing in multiple locations at once until he selects the coordinates that suit his purposes. It is theoretically possible but practically impossible. Yet he is executing it with apparent ease." Alucard reached out and touched the Romulan vessel's shield generator. And where his hand made contact, the shields fluctuated and failed. Not destroyed. They simply ceased to function, as though the power source had been redirected into him. Evasive maneuvers. Clarice commanded her crew, but there was nowhere to evade. Alucard had positioned himself at the intersection of three possible escape vectors. The Talvatha's weapons were useless against him. The ship's speed was irrelevant. For the first time in her career, Commander Clarice faced an enemy that transcended the categories of warfare she had been trained to understand. Alucard raised his hand, and the Romulan vessel's entire power grid went dark. Not destroyed. Simply, transferred. The no-life king was consuming the very energy that gave the Talvath life. "Stand down," Clarice's voice came through the subspace frequency, and there was no defiance in it now. Only survival instinct. "We are withdrawing. Stand down." Alucard released the Talvath, and power returned to her systems. The Romulan commander wasted no time in executing a hasty retreat, her vessel limping back toward the neutral zone, her shields and weapon systems functioning only at partial capacity. Alucard descended back into the Enterprise like a god returning to his temple, his form solidifying as he passed through the hull, his presence settling into the cargo bay as though nothing unusual had occurred. Kirk met him there personally, accompanied by security but making a deliberate show of standing between the guards and their prisoner. Alucard looked down at the captain of the Enterprise, and there was something almost like respect in that ancient gaze. "Your enemies are primitive," Alucard observed. "They think in 3 dimensions. They fight with weapons. They believe in tactics and strategy as though they were laws of nature rather than suggestions." He paused, his ice-blue eyes narrowing. "In my world, I had reached a point where combat had become stale. Predictable. Your universe, Captain Kirk, is refreshingly complicated. You just declared war on the Romulan Empire," Kirk said flatly. "Congratulations. You've made powerful enemies without firing a single shot." Alucard smiled, and it was the smile of something that had never truly feared anything in its existence. "The Romulans are irrelevant. But you, Captain, you are interesting. You risked everything by freeing me. You understood that sometimes the only way to face a predator is to point it at a greater threat. He extended his hand once more. I believe we have much we can accomplish together. Kirk did not take the hand this time. We're not accomplishing anything until you understand something fundamental about how things work in this universe. We have laws. We have ethics. And we have a prime directive that prevents us from interfering in the development of less advanced civilizations. Alucard's expression shifted subtly. You have principles that constrain your actions. We do. How fascinating, Alucard mused. And how limiting. But I will humor your principles, Captain. For now. Because in this universe, where I cannot control the rules as I once did, I am beginning to understand that I need allies more than I need conquest. It was a calculated statement, and Kirk understood the risk of what Alucard was implying. The creature had learned, in the space of minutes, to adapt to an environment where his reality-warping powers functioned but not perfectly. He was, in his own terrifying way, evolving to fit this new world. And that evolution made him far more dangerous than simple mindless aggression ever could. Spock, lock down all data regarding Alucard's capabilities, Kirk ordered. Full encryption, Section 31 protocols. I want every recording of what just happened stored in secure memory. Nobody accesses this information without my personal authorization. Already implemented, Captain, Spock confirmed. Kirk turned back to Alucard. You stay in this bay. You follow every order I give you. And you do nothing, without my explicit permission. Understand? Alucard inclined his head slightly, a gesture that might have been agreement or might have been a predator biding its time. Word of the Alucard incident spread through Starfleet Command like wildfire through dry brush. Kirk's reports, meticulously detailed by Spock, painted a picture so extraordinary that Starfleet Command oscillated between disbelief and existential panic. An immortal being. Dimensional powers beyond current understanding. A creature that had neutralized the Romulan warbird without traditional weapons. The ramifications were staggering. It was this conversation about Alucard's existence that caught the attention of the Klingon Empire. Intelligence operatives working for the House of Core intercepted subspace communications containing encrypted Starfleet chatter about the Enterprise's cargo. What they decoded was fragmentary but explosive. A being of incredible power had appeared in Federation space. A warrior of unknown origin with combat capabilities beyond measure. The implications were immediate and irresistible. The IKS Penthak arrived at the Enterprise's position with the subtlety of a disruptor cannon. Captain Kogar's vessel decloaked with weapons armed and a message that required no subtlety: surrender the being or face destruction. This is Captain Kogar of the Klingon battle cruiser Penthak, the message crackled through subspace. You have in your possession a warrior of unknown origin. This being is property of the Klingon Empire by right of combat acquisition. Deliver it to our custody, or we will extract it from your corpse. Kirk's first instinct was to refuse, but he understood the precarious political situation he was navigating. Starfleet was already stretching its relationship with the Klingon Empire to the breaking point. Provoking open warfare over a creature they barely understood would be suicidal. Put me in direct comm with Captain Kogar, Kirk ordered. The viewscreen flickered to life, revealing a Klingon of impressive bearing. Scarred, proud, with the eyes of a warrior who had fought 1,000 battles and won most of them. This was a being who understood combat not as strategy but as philosophy. Kogar, Kirk began, choosing his tone with careful deliberation, I understand your interest in the being aboard my ship. But understand this, we don't know what we have. It's not a weapon. It's not a resource. It's a creature that appears to exist by laws we don't understand. Kogar's response was immediate. Then we will understand it together, Kirk. Deliver the creature to our custody. We will determine what it is and what purpose it can serve the Empire. Before Kirk could respond, the cargo bay comm came alive with Spock's urgent voice. "Captain, Alucard is requesting to speak with the Klingon captain. He says it concerns mutual respect among warriors." Kirk's eyes narrowed. The creature was manipulating the situation, using the Klingon interest as leverage. Still, allowing Alucard to speak might provide insight into his nature and intentions. "Put him through," Kirk commanded. Alucard's voice emerged through the subspace channel with absolute clarity and perfect Klingon inflection, despite having no possible means of learning the language. "Captain Kogar, I am Alucard. I have studied the history of your people. The Klingon Empire was built by warriors who understood that honor and strength were synonymous. Who understood that true victory came not from numerical advantage but from the purity of combat." Kogar's expression shifted, something like intrigue crossing his scarred features. "You speak like a Klingon. Yet you are no Klingon." "I am something older," Alucard replied. "For centuries, I fought enemies who understood the value of a good death. Your culture, from what I have observed, understands this principle better than any I have encountered in this universe." Kirk watched this exchange with growing concern. Alucard was establishing rapport, presenting himself as kindred spirit to the Klingon ideology. The creature had clearly learned from his brief exposure to Federation values and understood that different civilizations respond to different appeals. "Captain Kirk," Kogar said, his eyes still locked on the view screen even though he was addressing the Federation captain, "I propose a test. Let the creature fight one of my finest warriors. If your being survives the combat and defeats my warrior, I will consider it possessed of sufficient honor to demand respect. If it falls, then you will deliver it to Klingon custody." It was a trap disguised as a sporting proposition. Either Kirk allowed Alucard to fight, risking the creature's escape or the Klingon learning too much about his capabilities, or he refused and admitted to restraining something he could not truly contain. "I will accept," Alucard's voice cut through before Kirk could respond. "But understand, Captain Kogar, I do not know if your warriors can kill me. I have fought countless opponents across centuries. Some were worthy. Most were not. But I have never refused a test of combat. It is the one language that transcends all universes." Kirk closed his eyes for a moment, recognizing he had just lost control of the situation. Alucard had transformed from prisoner to negotiator, from captive to participant. And in doing so, he had identified the one principle that all three factions, Federation, Romulan, Klingon, could temporarily respect, the code of combat. A shuttlecraft carried Alucard to a neutral asteroid, designated as the combat arena. Representatives from all three factions arrived to witness the event. Kirk watched from the Enterprise bridge as the Klingon warrior, a massive brute named Gortok with a record of 32 victories and 0 defeats, faced Alucard in hand-to-hand combat. What happened next would be discussed in bars and academies for years to come. Alucard did not move with superhuman speed. He did not display the reality-warping powers that had devastated the Romulan vessel. Instead, he fought like a Klingon. With perfect technique, brutal efficiency, and an understanding of combat that transcended mere physical capability. Every blow was calculated. Every defense was an offense. Every movement contained the weight of centuries. Gortok fell after 7 minutes. And as he fell, something shifted in the galactic balance. Alucard had proven himself not through destruction but through mastery. The Klingon would respect that. More importantly, Alucard had learned a crucial lesson. In this universe, where his reality-warping powers were constrained by unknown laws, his greatest asset was the accumulated wisdom of centuries of combat. Kogar's message came through with grudging respect, the creature fights with honor. I will withdraw my claim. But hear this, Kirk, this being is welcome in Klingon space. That is a courtesy the Federation should understand carries weight. As the Klingon vessel departed, Kirk felt the delicate balance of power shift once more. He now harbored not just an enigma but a political liability. Alucard had successfully positioned himself as a warrior of honor, a being worthy of respect across faction lines. The creature had transformed from prisoner to power player in the span of hours. Spock's voice came through quietly, "Captain, I believe we have fundamentally underestimated our guest's intelligence and adaptability. He is not merely surviving in this universe. He is learning to thrive in it." Kirk could only nod grimly and consider what forces he had unleashed by allowing Alucard to face the Klingon warrior. The answer came swiftly: he had unleashed the very thing Alucard had always wanted, freedom. The darkness of space holds secrets that even Starfleet's most advanced sensors struggle to comprehend. But Kirk was learning that some secrets are written not in electromagnetic radiation or stellar phenomena but in the hunger of an immortal predator beginning to awaken from centuries of domestication. Alucard's condition began to deteriorate approximately 60 hours after the combat with Gortok. Not physically, his body remained intact, his strength undiminished. But something deeper was fracturing. His connection to his native dimension had been severed by the transporter accident that brought him to this universe. For centuries, he had fed on the supernatural energies of his world, the very essence of darkness and death that defined Hellsing's reality. Here, in a universe that operated on quantum mechanics and subspace physics, that sustenance was absent. Spock detected the change first. "Captain, Alucard's energy output is fluctuating. His regeneration rate has slowed to approximately 60% of baseline. I believe he is experiencing a form of withdrawal." Kirk descended to the cargo bay to find Alucard collapsed against the far wall, his form flickering between states of solidity and something more ethereal. The creature's breathing was heavy, his ancient eyes burning with something Kirk had never seen before, desperation. "What's happening to him?" Kirk demanded. "He is starving," Spock replied, coming to stand beside the captain. "Not for food in the traditional sense. For the energy that sustains him. In his native universe, he was connected to supernatural forces beyond our scientific framework. Here, those connections are severed. He is, in essence, dying from isolation." Alucard's laugh came out as a wheeze. "Your science is more perceptive than I expected, Commander Spock. I am dying. But not in the way your universe understands death. I am becoming disconnected. Untethered. For the first time in centuries, I understand what it would mean to be truly mortal." Kirk's mind worked rapidly through the implications. "What do you need to survive?" "Energy," Alucard replied. "Specifically, life force. The essence that animates consciousness. Your universe calls it different things, the spark, the soul, chi. I require it to maintain coherence. Without it." He paused, and something ancient and terrible flickered across his face. "I begin to fade. To scatter across dimensional boundaries. To lose myself." Kirk understood what Alucard was suggesting before the creature even spoke the words. "You want to feed on members of my crew." "I want to survive," Alucard corrected. "And survival in this universe requires adaptation. Your people have life force. Consciousness. The very essence I require. I could take it without harm, a subtle draining, undetectable. They would live. I would persist. Everyone benefits." "No," Kirk said flatly. "We don't sacrifice Federation citizens to fuel your existence." Alucard's eyes blazed red. "Then I will die, Captain. And you will lose the most valuable asset you have ever possessed. Unless..." He paused, and a smile spread across his face. "Unless you allow me to prey on our mutual enemies." The implication was clear. Alucard was proposing a solution that would maintain his survival while simultaneously serving Federation interests. Romulan prisoners. Cardassian operatives. Anyone classified as an enemy of the state. All would provide the sustenance he required, and the Federation would be rid of problematic assets simultaneously. Kirk felt the weight of moral compromise pressing down on him. Every principle he stood for rebelled against the suggestion. But he also understood the brutal calculus of command: allow one being to feed on prisoners, or lose a potential ally and create a desperate, dying predator loose on a starship. "I'll find you another way," Kirk said. "But you will not feed on Federation citizens or members of the crew. That is non-negotiable." "Then I suggest you find that alternative very quickly, Captain," Alucard replied, his form flickering more rapidly now. "Time is a resource I am rapidly exhausting." Kirk returned to the bridge and called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The situation was unprecedented. They had no protocols for sustaining a transdimensional predator. They had no energy sources that approximated the supernatural forces of Alucard's native realm. They had only one option: improvise. It was Scotty who provided the breakthrough, his engineer's pragmatism seeing solutions where others saw only problems. If the creature feeds on life force, on consciousness energy, then perhaps he could subsist on a substitute. "We harvest tributes, those breeding vermin we use for biological research. Millions of them, packed into stasis chambers. Each one carries consciousness of a sort. Not human, not intelligent, but alive. If the creature fed on them in controlled quantities." The solution was elegant in its brutality. The Enterprise carried thousands of tributes in its biological research section. By carefully siphoning off a percentage of the creature's vital energy through specially designed containment fields, they could provide Alucard with the sustenance he required while maintaining operational secrecy. Kirk authorized the measure with only the slightest hesitation. He had crossed into morally gray territory the moment he allowed a predator onto his ship. Feeding it on laboratory animals seemed almost reasonable by comparison. But Alucard understood what had occurred. When Kirk informed him of the solution, the creature's expression shifted to something almost like disappointment. "You are pragmatic, Captain. You have bent your principles rather than breaking them entirely. That is either wisdom or cowardice, and I have yet to determine which." Alucard accepted the energy transfer eagerly, his form solidifying as the life force of thousands of tributes flowed into him. "But understand this, you have now created a dependency. I will require this sustenance regularly. And when your tributes are exhausted, your calculation will become more difficult." Kirk left the cargo bay understanding that Alucard had maneuvered him into a position of compromised morality. The creature had not forced Kirk to make a decision, it had simply presented options and allowed the captain's own logic to lead him toward the darkest choice available. In doing so, Alucard had transformed their relationship from captor and captive to partners in moral compromise. It was, Kirk realized, exactly the kind of psychological manipulation a creature that had existed for centuries would have mastered perfectly. The next transmission arrived not from any known faction but through an encrypted subspace channel that should have been impossible to crack. It emanated from a ship that existed outside conventional reality, a vessel that blinked in and out of normal space at will, piloted by a being whose relationship to the laws of physics was fundamentally different from any creature in the Federation's databases. James T. Kirk, the voice crackled through the comm, dripping with amusement and ancient malice. "How delightfully predictable. You find an anomaly. You contain it. You negotiate with it. And all the while, you fail to recognize that the anomaly may be exactly what the universe intended." Spock's instruments went haywire. "Captain, that transmission, the energy signature suggests omnipotent class power output. I am detecting the presence of a being that should not be detectable by standard sensors." Kirk's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. He had heard it whisper through reality itself, seen it reshape worlds on a whim. Q. The viewscreen erupted with an image, a man in Starfleet uniform, handsome in an unsettling way, with eyes that contained the vast knowledge and absolute amusement of an immortal. Q, the entity that had pestered Kirk for years, testing humanity at whim, playing with mortals as though they were chess pieces in a game of inconceivable complexity. In the flesh, so to speak, Q said, his smile predatory. Or rather, in whatever manifestation pleases me. I have been watching your predicament with considerable interest, Kirk. An immortal from another dimension, unable to fully access his power source, being educated in the ways of Federation ethics by a captain stubborn enough to believe that principles matter in an uncaring universe. Q leaned back, clearly enjoying himself. It's magnificent. It's tragic. It's absolutely the sort of chaos that makes existence bearable. What do you want, Q? Kirk demanded, his voice steady despite the existential threat the entity represented. I want to see what happens when you push your little experiment to its breaking point, Q replied. I want to observe what occurs when a predator like Alucard confronts the limitations of your precious Federation ethics. I want to see if he will break, adapt, or transcend. Q's expression shifted, becoming almost thoughtful. But I grow bored with passive observation. So I have decided to accelerate matters. The subspace channel abruptly filled with classified Federation coordinates, the locations of high-security detention facilities, black sites where the Federation housed its most dangerous prisoners, and something more, the location of a Section 31 biological weapons research station. Go there, Kirk, Q commanded. Because Alucard is going there. I have ensured his knowledge of your Federation's darkest secrets. And I suspect that when a warrior of his philosophy discovers what you are truly capable of creating, your little moral compromise regarding tribute consumption will seem quaint by comparison. The transmission cut off, leaving Kirk facing a screen of static and the terrible knowledge that Q, an omnipotent being, had taken a personal interest in Alucard's integration into the Federation. Yellow alert, Kirk commanded, his mind already calculating vectors and response times. Set course for the coordinates provided. Maximum warp. And someone get me everything we have on Section 31's operations. I want to know what we're walking into before we arrive. Spock's fingers flew across his console. Captain, those coordinates place us in a region of space that is officially not documented in Federation records. Section 31 maintains autonomous operation independent of Starfleet oversight. If Alucard has learned of their existence, he'll view them as a threat to be eliminated or a resource to be exploited, Kirk finished grimly. Either way, it means violence. They found Alucard in the cargo bay, standing perfectly still, his ancient eyes staring at something only he could perceive. When Kirk entered, the creature turned, and there was something fundamentally different about him. The hunger was gone. The uncertainty had vanished. What remained was the thing that Alucard truly was, a predator that had finally identified its true prey. Q came to you, Kirk stated. Yes, Alucard confirmed. The omnipotent fool provided me with information about your civilization's genuine nature. Not the Federation of peaceful exploration and ethical principles. But the Federation beneath, Section 31, your secret police, your biological laboratories, your weapons programs. Alucard smiled, and it was the smile of something that had found its purpose. Captain Kirk, your universe is not so different from mine after all. You are simply more hypocritical about it. We maintain those programs to protect the Federation, Kirk replied, knowing even as he spoke the words that they were insufficient. You maintain them because power corrupts, Alucard countered. Your universe is ruled by law, but law is just another word for consensus tyranny. Those Section 31 scientists are no different from the researchers in my dimension who experimented with life and death. Except your scientists hide behind bureaucracy rather than owning their nature. Kirk understood in that moment that Alucard was beyond manipulation. The creature had evolved from captive to ally to independent actor. And now, with Q's intervention, he had identified something he could target with absolute conviction, an institution built on the very predatory principles he understood. I can't let you attack Section 31, Kirk said. Then stop me, Alucard replied simply. But understand this, Captain, I am no longer your weapon or your burden. I am simply the inevitable consequence of your universe's contradictions. You imprisoned me. You fed me. You negotiated with me. And in doing so, you have allowed something far more dangerous to emerge, a predator who understands your rules and has decided to break them. Alucard moved toward the cargo bay door, passing Kirk without attempting violence. The captain could have drawn his phaser. Could have attempted to stop the creature. Instead, he stood aside, understanding that to stop Alucard would require a sacrifice he was not prepared to make. The creature ascended through the Enterprise's corridors like a force of nature, heading toward the transporter room. Every security officer who attempted to block his path was casually subdued, not killed, but removed from Alucard's presence with contemptuous efficiency. Kirk's voice came through the ship-wide comm, "All hands, Alucard is loose. Secure all sections. Do not attempt to engage." But Alucard was already gone, the transporter signature carrying him toward the Section 31 facility and whatever reckoning awaited him there. Behind him, the Enterprise was left to follow, and Kirk was forced to choose between stopping a predator he could not contain or watching his Federation's darkest secrets be exposed. He had gambled by unleashing Alucard against the Romulans. He had compromised by feeding the creature on tributes. And now he was faced with the ultimate consequence of his choices. The monster he had embraced was turning on its creator. Q's laughter echoed through subspace, and Kirk understood that the omnipotent entity had orchestrated every moment of this encounter, testing humanity not through direct confrontation but through the slow-motion disaster of moral compromise. The Section 31 installation designated Black Widow Station hung in space like a spider's web, a structure of brutal functionality designed to remain invisible to casual observation, camouflaged by subspace harmonics and passive sensor suppression. Its purpose was to conduct the experiments and develop the weapons that the Federation's public face denied ever creating. Inside its reinforced walls, scientists played God with genetic manipulation, biological engineering, and weapons systems that would horrify the Federation Council if their existence ever became known. Alucard's arrival was not heralded by weapons fire or diplomatic channels. He simply appeared, materializing in the central hub of the station through means that no amount of analysis could adequately explain. And when the station's security personnel attempted to contain him, they discovered that they were facing something beyond even Section 31's classified threat assessments. Kirk's Enterprise dropped out of warp to find the installation already in chaos. Weapons discharge was scorching the station's hull. Life support systems were failing. And somewhere within the darkness of Black Widow Station, a predator that had lived for centuries was dismantling an institution piece by piece. "Spock, what's his status?" Kirk demanded from the command chair. "Alucard has penetrated the station's security perimeter and is moving toward the Central Research Laboratory. I am detecting minimal resistance from Black Widow personnel. He is processing them with remarkable efficiency. Captain, I must note that his combat methodology appears to have evolved significantly in the short time since our initial encounter." Kirk understood what Spock was saying without the Vulcan needing to elaborate. Alucard had learned to kill in this universe's context. He had adapted his centuries of experience to Federation technology and defensive systems. What should have been his greatest weakness, his isolation from his native dimensions, supernatural forces, had become irrelevant. The creature had simply replaced those powers with raw tactical genius and inexhaustible determination. "Open a channel to Section 31 Command," Kirk ordered. "I need to know what Alucard is looking for." The response came after a tense silence, and it was from someone Kirk recognized immediately, Admiral Marcus, Section 31's Shadow Commander, a man whose dedication to Federation security had long ago erased any sense of ethical boundaries. "Kirk, you have destroyed everything," Marcus's voice came through, tight with rage and desperation. "Your creature is accessing our genetic archives. Our weapons research. If he escapes with even a fraction of what he is stealing." "What is he stealing?" Kirk interrupted. Everything, Marcus replied. Genetic templates for weapons we've been developing. Research into dimensional warfare. Data on every classified species modification program we maintain. And... Marcus paused, and Kirk heard something he had never heard in the Admiral's voice before: fear. He is releasing our test subjects. The implications were staggering. Section 31's genetic laboratories didn't just develop weapons. They created them, hybrid organisms, modified species, biological agents that existed at the intersection of life and sentience. Releasing them would create a humanitarian disaster that would echo across the Federation for generations. But that was precisely what Alucard was doing. The No-Life King understood something fundamental about institutions like Section 31. They existed because people allowed them to exist. They maintained power through secrecy and the inability of external forces to challenge their operations. So Alucard was not simply stealing data. He was exposing the institution to sunlight, letting it burn in the glare of Federation scrutiny. Kirk made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Spock, target Black Widow Station's central reactor core. If Alucard escapes. With that data, the fallout will be worse than destroying the station. Captain, there are likely civilian personnel still aboard, Spock pointed out. Then we're out of time, Kirk replied grimly. Do it. The photon torpedoes streaked through the darkness, impacting the reactor core with devastating precision. The explosion was controlled but catastrophic, precisely calibrated to destroy the station without generating debris that might contaminate nearby systems. Black Widow Station bloomed with brilliant light and fragmented into dust. Alucard's figure materialized on the Enterprise's transporter pad exactly as the explosion reached its crescendo, the creature having escaped at the final possible moment, carrying with him data sticks and research materials that Section 31 had classified beyond comprehension. Security surrounded him immediately, but Alucard did not resist. He simply stood on the transporter pad, his form streaked with the plasma discharge from the station's death throes, holding the stolen data with the casualness of someone who understood that no physical containment could hold him any longer. You destroyed your own installation to prevent me from escaping with information, Alucard observed, his ancient eyes studying Kirk with something approaching respect. How pragmatic. How absolutely moral. You sacrificed the lives of every scientist still aboard that station to maintain operational security. Section 31 would have been proud. Kirk said nothing. There was nothing to say. The utilitarian calculus had been simple: prevent the release of Section 31's data, which would devastate Federation security, or allow hundreds of deaths to be justified by national interest. He had chosen the lesser of two evils, and that choice had transformed him into something he had never wanted to be. A figure capable of authorizing genocide to preserve institutions. You understand now, Alucard continued, that your universe is not fundamentally different from mine. We are both predators wearing different masks. I wore the mask of a soldier serving a country. You wear the mask of principles serving a civilization. But beneath the masks, we are executing the same calculus, deciding whose lives matter and whose lives can be expended. Spock's voice came through the calm, tightly controlled. Captain, there is something else you should know. Our sensors detected a dimensional rift opening near the reactor core at the moment of explosion. Something came through, another being, following Alucard through the breach. The distortion is currently too severe to analyze, but it is consistent with life signs. Kirk's blood ran cold. What are you saying, Mr. Spock? I am saying, Captain, that Q's presence in this region of space may not have been incidental. I am saying that the dimensional breach that brought Alucard here may not have been an accident. I am saying that in attempting to stop one predator, you may have opened a door to others. The Enterprise hung in space above the wreckage of Black Widow Station, and Kirk understood that he had just committed the greatest error of his command. In trying to contain a predator from another dimension, he had allowed it to weaponize Federation society's darkest secrets against the institution that created them. Alucard smiled, and the smile contained the satisfaction of a being that had finally found an environment where his true nature could flourish. The confrontation that defined everything occurred not on the bridge of the Enterprise or in the depths of space, but in the observation lounge where Kirk and Alucard faced each other with no barrier between them, no force field, no security detail, no technological advantage. Just two beings attempting to make sense of a collision that should never have occurred. "You blame me for Section 31, Alucard began, his voice carrying centuries of exhaustion and transcendent wisdom. You believe that by releasing their data, by exposing their operations, I have somehow damaged the Federation beyond repair. But consider what I have actually done, Captain. I have forced your civilization to acknowledge its own predatory nature. I have shattered the comfortable lie that law and ethics are separate from power and survival." Kirk's hands were clasped behind his back, his posture that of a man carrying burdens too heavy to articulate. "You've destroyed institutions that protect billions of lives." "No," Alucard corrected. "I have exposed institutions that you created to do what must be done while maintaining plausible deniability. Your Section 31 was never the enemy, Captain. It was your conscience. It was the part of the Federation that understood that civilization requires predators of its own." The words were uncomfortable truths that Kirk could not refute without lying to himself. Section 31 existed because the Federation required it. The classified weapons research, the genetic modifications, the biological warfare programs, they existed because threats to Federation security demanded response mechanisms that operated outside the law. "What do you want?" Kirk asked simply. "Freedom," Alucard replied. "Simple, absolute freedom. I did not ask to be brought to this universe. I did not ask to be caged and studied and fed tributes like a beast in a zoo. But now that I am here, now that I have begun to understand how to survive and thrive in a reality with different rules, I want only to exist on my own terms." "We can't allow that," Kirk said. "You're too dangerous. You've already proven that. I am only dangerous to institutions that depend on hidden atrocities to maintain power," Alucard countered. "Your Federation is discovering that I am not a threat to its principles, because its principles have always been negotiable when survival demanded it." He paused, his ancient eyes boring into Kirk's. "Unless, of course, you intend to execute me. Many have tried. All have failed. But your technology is different. Perhaps Captain Kirk will succeed where millennia of enemies have not." Kirk understood what Alucard was offering, not just freedom but a test. The creature was explicitly giving Kirk the opportunity to end this situation permanently, fully accepting the consequences if Kirk was capable of delivering them. The captain did not hesitate. He raised the phaser he had brought into the observation lounge and set it to its maximum power setting. "Last chance, Alucard. Stand down, or I will fire." Alucard did not move. He stood perfectly still, allowing his form to become a target, his defenses lowered in an act of absolute vulnerability. Kirk fired. The beam struck Alucard directly, overloading his form with destructive force that should have annihilated any creature in the known universe. For a moment, the creature's physical form shattered, dispersed across spatial dimensions in an explosion of plasma and shadow. Then he reformed. His left side was damaged, his arm hanging limp, part of his face seared away by the weapon discharge. But he was regenerating, his body stitching itself back together with a speed and precision that defied both medicine and physics. Within seconds, he was whole again, his damage fully repaired. "Your conclusion should be logical, Captain," Alucard said, his voice unchanged despite the regeneration. "I cannot be killed by your weapons. I cannot be contained by your technology. I cannot be controlled by your laws. I can only be accommodated or opposed infinitely without resolution." Kirk lowered the phaser, understanding that the creature was right. He had exhausted every option available to him as commander of a single starship. The Federation's choices were now limited: either accept Alucard's existence and attempt to negotiate coexistence, or escalate to full-scale military engagement that would likely fail and certainly consume resources Federation security could not afford. "What are your terms?" Kirk asked. "Simple," Alucard replied. "I will operate within Federation space without directly interfering with Federation operations. In exchange, you will guarantee me the freedom to exist without persecution. You will provide me with the sustenance I require, continued access to your tribute population or arrangements for equivalent life force acquisition. And you will ensure that my existence remains known to the major factions but not to the general Federation population." Kirk understood the calculation immediately. Alucard wanted to remain unknown to the average Federation citizen while maintaining credibility with the political power structure. By doing so, the creature could operate as a deterrent against Federation enemies while maintaining the very anonymity that allowed Section 31 to function. "In other words," Kirk said slowly, "you want to become what Section 31 should have been. A tool of Federation security that operates outside public morality." "I want to become myself," Alucard replied. "Everything else is interpretation." Kirk extended his hand. It was a gesture he had refused before, but now it carried weight it had not possessed during their first meeting. This was not capitulation to a prisoner or negotiation with a potential ally. This was compromise with the devil himself. "We have an accord," Kirk said. Alucard took the offered hand, and the ice-cold contact reaffirmed what Kirk already knew. He had just transformed the Federation from a civilization defined by principles into one defined by pragmatism. The creature would operate within Federation space as a tool, an asset, a shadow weapon that no one could name but everyone understood was protecting them from threats beyond their comprehension. It was a solution that satisfied no one and solved nothing. But it was the only solution available to a captain who had learned that some choices cannot be undone, only lived with. The Enterprise dropped out of warp at Starbase 12 with the official report that Black Widow Station had been destroyed due to structural failure and that all personnel had been evacuated. It was a lie sanctioned by Admiral Marcus and the Federation Security Council, a fiction maintained to prevent public knowledge of Section 31's operations while allowing intelligence assets to adjust their activities without interruption. Alucard remained aboard the Enterprise, officially classified as a classified asset for ongoing scientific research and diplomatic analysis. Unofficially, he was a weapon the Federation had acknowledged but not named, a predator it had learned to live alongside by offering him autonomy in exchange for selective service. Spock completed his final analysis of the creature's physiology and presented his findings to Kirk in the ready room. The Vulcan's expression was characteristically composed, but there was something in his eyes that suggested even his logical mind found the conclusions disturbing. "The subject's biology indicates that his integration into this universe is becoming increasingly complete," Spock reported. "His regeneration rate has stabilized at peak efficiency. His dimensional fluctuations have ceased. He is, for all practical purposes, becoming a permanent resident of our reality. Most concerning, Captain, is that his consciousness appears to be fragmenting across multiple locations simultaneously. By my calculations, within 6 months, he will be capable of existing in multiple places at once, essentially becoming a distributed consciousness impossible to locate or contain." Kirk absorbed this information without visible reaction, though internally he recognized what it meant. Alucard would not remain a tool of the Federation for long. The creature was adapting, evolving, becoming something that transcended Federation control through simple biological necessity. Eventually, the implicit contract between Kirk and Alucard would become irrelevant because the creature would have evolved beyond the need for such arrangements. That was a problem for future captains to solve. Kirk authorized Alucard's transfer to a classified facility in remote Federation space, designated as Research Station Gamma and operated jointly by Starfleet and Section 31. It was a compromise solution that satisfied neither party but allowed both to maintain the fiction that the situation was under control. Before Alucard departed the Enterprise, He visited Kirk one final time in the observation lounge where their confrontation had occurred. The creature moved with liquid grace, his ancient eyes reflecting starlight that belonged to a universe he had learned to call home. "You have done well, Captain," Alucard observed. "You have survived our encounter with your principles largely intact. That is more than most creatures accomplish." "And what have you accomplished?" Kirk asked. "I have discovered that even in a universe where my powers are constrained, I remain what I have always been, a survivor. More importantly, I have discovered that your civilization is, at its core, fundamentally similar to mine. You create predators and then claim to be surprised when they act like predators. You fence in the strong and call it law. You compromise your principles and call it pragmatism." Alucard smiled, and there was something almost like affection in the expression. "I think I may come to like this universe, despite its confusions." Kirk watched as the creature departed, understanding that he had not contained Alucard so much as redirected him. The predator would continue to evolve, continue to adapt, continue to find ways to exist on his own terms while the Federation maintained the comfortable lie that it controlled the situation. In the weeks that followed, reports began filtering through classified channels about Alucard's activities at Research Station Gamma. He had absorbed data on Federation genetic research and Federation technology. He had learned to interface with Federation computer systems, manipulating them with intuitive ease. He had even begun mentoring younger Section 31 operatives, teaching them combat techniques that had been refined over centuries and philosophies of power that predated Federation civilization by generations. Spock submitted his final assessment. "Captain, I believe we have not contained the threat so much as weaponized it. In attempting to control Alucard, we have allowed him access to the tools necessary to become something far more dangerous than he was upon arrival." Kirk's response was simple, "Then we hope he remembers that we made that accommodation possible." But in his quarters, late at night, Kirk considered the deeper implications of what had transpired. The Federation had weathered the encounter with Alucard, but not unchanged. Section 31 had been exposed and subsequently strengthened rather than weakened. The Prime Directive had been suspended when convenience demanded it. And a creature of absolute predatory power had been integrated into Federation society by simply being acknowledged rather than opposed. Q's laughter still echoed through subspace in Kirk's memories, and he understood that the omnipotent entity had orchestrated this encounter to demonstrate something fundamental about civilization. That underneath the laws and ethics and principles lay the same predatory drives that defined every living creature. The difference between the Federation and darker civilizations was not principle but merely better public relations. The Enterprise resumed its mission of exploration and discovery, leaving behind the complications of Alucard and classified facilities and moral compromises. But Kirk knew that the universe had been fundamentally altered by the creature's arrival. Somewhere in Federation space, an immortal warrior was learning to navigate a civilization that had tried to contain him and failed. And in the darkness between stars, other dimensional breaches were forming, other tiers in the fabric of reality that might bring other creatures, other challenges, other tests of Federation principles. The universe was expanding, and the Federation was learning, slowly and painfully, that the principles it had built itself upon were negotiable when survival demanded it. Conclusion. The interdimensional rupture that brought Alucard to the Enterprise was not an accident of physics but a question posed by forces beyond Federation comprehension. In attempting to contain a predator from another universe, Captain Kirk had forced his civilization to confront the uncomfortable reality that exists at the core of every functioning society. That order requires predators, that laws are written by those powerful enough to enforce them, and that principles are luxuries affordable only by civilizations that have the strength to maintain them. Alucard's collision with the original series-era Federation did not destroy the institution, it transformed it. By exposing Section 31's operations and forcing the Federation to acknowledge the existence of a being that could not be contained by conventional means, the No-Life King had inadvertently strengthened the very civilization he had challenged. The Federation learned that it could survive compromise. It learned that pragmatism was a viable alternative to principle. And it learned that sometimes the only way to negotiate with a predator was to become one yourself. But the question that lingered in Kirk's mind, and would resonate through Starfleet corridors for decades, was whether the Federation had truly accommodated Alucard or whether it had simply delayed an inevitable confrontation. The creature was evolving, adapting, becoming something that transcended the categories of threat and asset. In saving his universe from total chaos, Kirk had perhaps unleashed something far more dangerous. A predator that understood Federation civilization as well as he understood himself, and who could operate within that civilization's frameworks while remaining fundamentally committed to his own survival. In the end, what matters is not whether Kirk succeeded or failed in containing Alucard. What matters is that the encounter forced the Federation to acknowledge that law without power is mere suggestion, and that principles without the strength to enforce them are only comfortable fictions. Alucard existed in the Federation universe not because he was weak but because he had learned something that the Federation itself was only beginning to understand. That survival in any universe requires the willingness to challenge its fundamental assumptions and live with the consequences of that challenge. The darkness between stars had brought light, but it was not the warm, reassuring light of exploration and discovery. It was the harsh, revealing light of truth, the understanding that civilization is built not on principles but on predators willing to enforce them. Live long and prosper. More stories await.